White woman calls police on black girl speechless when her mom arrives and she's the FBI chief. A bright summer morning in Chicago's lakeside Grant Park should have been the perfect setting for peace and laughter. Instead, it would become the backdrop to a shocking confrontation that no one saw coming. Tiana, a bright-eyed black teenager, arrived at the park that day full of hope. Little did she know a single phone call would turn her world upside down, and that the woman behind it would soon regret dialing those 3 fateful digits. But the biggest surprise of all? Tiana's mother, the last person you'd expect to walk into the chaos, was about to change the entire outcome forever. Margaret Slater prided herself on a life of order, routine, and a set of rigid beliefs she'd never thought to question. At 53, with a silver bob cut impeccably every month at a salon on the Magnificent Mile, she moved through her day with a determined stride and an ever-present sense of watchfulness. She wore tailored suits, read the Chicago Tribune religiously, and contributed to her local homeowners association, often spearheading initiatives that kept her neighborhood looking a certain way. To her, appearances mattered above all else, and she guarded them fiercely. On this particular morning, Margaret decided to take a walk through Grant Park, a sprawling public space in the heart of downtown Chicago. It was famous for Buckingham Fountain, the huge formal gardens, and the open-air festivals that drew people of all backgrounds together. Margaret often insisted she liked the park's family-friendly atmosphere, though her eyes grew hard whenever she saw people she deemed out of place. She sipped from her thermos of chamomile tea and strolled along a neatly paved path, lined with flower beds, pink, yellow, and orange blossoms dancing in the breeze. As Margaret passed a group of runners, she noticed a teenage girl, maybe 14 or 15, kneeling on the grass near a tree. The girl wore colorful sneakers, jeans a bit worn at the knees, and a bright green T-shirt. Her braided hair glistened under the sun. She was humming softly and fiddling with the strap of her backpack. For a few seconds, Margaret slowed her pace. Curiosity piqued. Something about the girl's presence unsettled her, but she wasn't sure what. Then the girl Tiana looked up, and her eyes briefly met Margaret's. Tiana offered a polite nod, a hint of a smile. But Margaret turned away, her face neutral, if not a little frosty. She couldn't say why, but a creeping unease formed in her stomach. She'd seen news reports about petty crimes in the area. Perhaps that was it, she told herself. Margaret continued her walk, deciding to complete her usual route, down past the fountain, loop around the rose garden, and circle back to her car. Along the way, she tried to banish thoughts of Tiana from her mind. "Don't be silly," she muttered under her breath. "She's just a kid, probably waiting for friends." But the seed of suspicion had been planted. About 20 minutes later, after Margaret finished photographing a bed of particularly gorgeous tulips for her gardening club's social media page, she spotted Tiana again. The girl was standing near a small playground, apparently looking at a small group of children playing tag. Tiana dug a hand into her backpack, pulled out what looked like a water bottle, and took a drink. It was a perfectly innocent scene, but Margaret's eyes narrowed. Why was this teenager lingering in the park with no adult supervision, no friends in sight? A memory of a recent home association meeting flitted through Margaret's mind. Someone had complained about young people loitering in the local park. "They're up to no good," one of Margaret's neighbors had insisted. "We need to be vigilant." Margaret had nodded in agreement then. And it was that neighbor's voice she heard now in her mind, fueling her suspicions. Her heart rate picked up. Something about Tiana's presence seemed out of place to her, though she couldn't pinpoint any real reason. As a teacher used to say in Margaret's old neighborhood watch group, "If you see something, say something." The phrase rang in her head like an alarm bell, urging her to act. Was the girl recording something on her phone? Margaret couldn't tell from where she stood. She moved closer, trying to appear casual as she approached. Tiana was indeed holding her phone, but just scrolling through music tracks, completely unaware that a stranger was zeroing in on her. Margaret, however, interpreted Tiana's phone usage as suspicious. Is she taking photos of the children? Margaret wondered, imagining 1,000 worst-case scenarios. With each step, Margaret's apprehension deepened, feeding itself. She glanced around for a police officer but saw none. Suddenly, she remembered she had the local precinct's non-emergency number saved. She'd once been commended by her HOA for calling in a suspicious van parked on her street. Perhaps she should call the police now, just to be safe, she told herself. She might be part of a gang or planning a scam, ridiculous leaps of logic, but they rolled through Margaret's mind with unstoppable momentum. Tiana, oblivious to the drama unfolding in Margaret's head, watched the children play. A small pang of longing tugged at her heart. Her own childhood had been hectic. Her mum worked long hours, so these moments of carefree play were rare for her. She was there in the park, waiting for a friend from a nearby community centre. They were supposed to meet for a volunteer event, handing out free lunches to homeless communities around the area. Since Tiana had arrived early, she decided to relax under the trees and enjoy the breeze. She had no clue she was under scrutiny. Margaret's phone was already in her hand. Her heart thudded against her chest. Convinced she was doing the right thing, she dialed 911. On the other end of the line, the dispatcher calmly asked for the nature of the emergency. Margaret's voice trembled at first, but her well-practiced sense of self-assuredness kicked in quickly. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious individual," she said, carefully enunciating each word as if testifying in court. "I'm at Grant Park, near the playground. There's a teenage girl here, loitering, possibly filming or photographing small children. She seems out of place. Could you send an officer to check it out?" The dispatcher asked for a description, and Margaret provided Tiana's approximate age, race, clothing, and location. The operator's tone was neutral. "Officers will be on their way shortly, ma'am. Stay on the line if you feel threatened." Margaret ended the call, her hands slightly shaky. A part of her questioned if she was overreacting, but the bigger part of her felt justified. "Better safe than sorry," she whispered to herself, squaring her shoulders as she prepared to wait. The stage was set for a confrontation neither Margaret nor Tiana could have envisioned. Little did Margaret realize that the events unfolding would soon spiral far beyond her control, and that, within the next hour, everything she assumed about the world, about who belongs and who doesn't, would be turned upside down. If Tiana Jones had known she'd soon be labeled suspicious, she would have laughed. She felt anything but. Her day had started early, around 6 a.m., as she hopped out of bed in her small yet cozy bedroom on Chicago's South Side. Posters of her favorite music artists decorated the walls: Alicia Keys, Chance the Rapper, and Ella Mai. Motivational quotes her mother had taped up years ago still hung around the mirror, messages like "You are powerful, brilliant, and brave," scrawled in curly script. Her mother, Special Agent Yvonne Jordan, had left for work before sunrise. She was heading to the Chicago FBI field office, where her days were crammed with meetings, investigative briefings, and strategic planning. Tiana always wished she could spend more time with her mum, but she understood. Yvonne was dedicated to her job and to making a difference. That morning, Tiana texted her mother a quick message: "Good luck at work, Mum. Love, you." Yvonne responded with a heart emoji and a promise to check in later. Tiana had her own plans. She dressed quickly, slipping on jeans, her favorite neon green t-shirt, and the bright sneakers she'd saved up for months to buy. She also packed a small bag of essentials for the volunteer event she was participating in later that day at a local shelter. Her best friend, Kiara, had arranged for them to meet in Grant Park first, because Kiara was scheduled for a quick violin lesson at a nearby music conservatory. Tiana thought it'd be fun to enjoy the park in the meantime. After a short train ride, she arrived at Grant Park, stepping into the gentle hush of morning. She inhaled the crisp air, feeling the city's pulse, the wide lawns, the scattered clusters of people jogging or walking dogs. Everything about the park felt calm, welcoming. She found a shady spot under a tree, put in her earbuds, and swayed to a favorite R&B track. Occasionally, she pulled out her phone to check for texts from Kiara. Children's laughter floated from the small playground not too far away. Tiana smiled at the sight of toddlers chasing each other, their parents or babysitters half watching from benches. It reminded her of simpler days when she was little, days spent with her mum in city parks. Usually, Yvonne had a tight schedule, but she always tried to carve out a Sunday or two for Tiana. They'd feed ducks in the pond or share an ice cream cone from a street vendor. Tiana felt a mix of nostalgia and gratitude. Life wasn't perfect. Her mum's job often kept her busy, and Tiana had to be independent, but Tiana admired her mother deeply. That admiration carried over into Tiana's own sense of right and wrong. She'd seen enough news stories about injustices, especially those targeting black communities. She wanted to do her small part. Volunteering was one way to channel that passion. Her mum had taught her the importance of serving others, instilling in her a belief that every act of kindness rippled outward. That was why she was here today, waiting for Kiara, to help the less fortunate, to spread hope in a world that often felt cold. Oblivious to the gaze fixed upon her, Tiana rummaged in her backpack for a water bottle. As she drank, she glanced at her phone to see if Kiara had messaged. Nothing yet. She turned up her music volume a notch. The track was Alicia Keys's Girl on Fire, which always gave her a jolt of confidence. She mouthed some of the lyrics, her thoughts adrift in optimism. She didn't notice Margaret Slater watching her from across the lawn, nor did she notice the phone call Margaret made. Only when a pair of uniformed police officers began walking purposefully across the grass faces. Serious, eyes scanning, did Tiana sense something was off. She tensed, pulling out her earbuds and pausing her music. A flicker of unease gripped her. Why were they headed straight toward the playground? Toward her? Tiana swallowed hard. She'd been raised to respect law enforcement, but she'd also been cautioned about what could happen when prejudice and fear mix. Her mother had given her the talk, a necessary conversation for many black parents and their children, how to handle encounters with the police. Tiana reminded herself to stay calm, keep her hands visible, and remain polite. The officers approached two men, one older and heavyset, the other younger and tall. The older officer spoke first, his voice firm but not overtly hostile. "Excuse me, miss. May we talk to you for a moment?" Confusion flashed across Tiana's face. She nodded, stepping back slightly to give them space. "Sure. Is something wrong?" The older officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "We received a call about someone matching your description, possibly videotaping or taking photographs of children." He cleared his throat. "We just need to check that everything is okay." Tiana's eyes widened. She shook her head in disbelief. "I'm not videotaping anyone. I'm just here waiting for a friend. She pointed to her phone. "I was listening to music." From a short distance away, Margaret hovered, hands clasped over her chest, watching the exchange. The younger officer looked over, saw Margaret, and gestured for her to come closer. She stepped forward, her composure rigid. Tiana noticed Margaret, then noticed the way she stood, chin lifted with what looked like quiet disapproval. "This is the woman who called us," the younger officer said, nodding at Margaret. "Can you tell us what you saw?" Margaret gave Tiana a look that combined suspicion and a self-righteous sense of authority. "I saw her near the playground, fiddling with her phone. I've heard of cases where people film children for whatever purpose," she said, letting the insinuation hang in the air. "It made me uncomfortable. I just wanted the police to check it out." Tiana's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. I wasn't filming anyone, she repeated softly, trying to maintain control. I was literally just listening to music and waiting for my friend. The officers glanced at each other. The older one sighed, seeming a bit tired. He turned to Tiana again. Do you have any identification, young lady? We'd like to verify your information. Tiana reached slowly for her backpack, remembering her mother's advice not to make any sudden movements. Her voice quivered slightly. Sure, I have my school ID. She handed it over. The officer studied it. Tiana Jones, Chicago Classical Academy. All right. Margaret watched, her face set in stone. Yet, as she observed Tiana's trembling hands, a sliver of doubt began to trickle into Margaret's conscience. Was she truly a threat? Or was this all a misunderstanding, one fueled by Margaret's own assumptions? The older officer handed Tiana back her ID. We're going to run a quick check. Just standard procedure, he explained. He spoke into his radio, providing Tiana's name and date of birth. She stood there, heart pounding. Moments later, the dispatch voice crackled back, confirming no warrants, no issues. Ma'am, said the older officer to Margaret, turning with a guarded look, the individual checks out clean. No cause for concern. Maybe we can handle this as a simple misunderstanding. Margaret frowned, not fully willing to back down yet. But she was standing so close to the children. She stammered, her conviction wavering. Part of her still believed something sinister might be lurking behind Tiana's innocent demeanor. Tiana interjected, her voice calm but firm. I've done nothing wrong. I'm waiting for a friend. I have every right to be in this park. Before the officers could respond, Tiana's phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Kiara was running late. Tiana exhaled, relief mixing with frustration. If you need more information, she added, my mum can clarify everything. She's at work right now, but I can call her. Margaret looked uneasy, as though the mention of a parent might complicate things. The younger officer said, that might not be necessary, but it's your right. You're not being detained. Margaret's mouth opened to speak, but no words came out. For some reason, an uneasy feeling took root in her stomach. Something in Tiana's composure unsettled Margaret. It was the quiet confidence in the girl's voice when she said, you should speak to my mum. A protest formed on Margaret's lips, but she swallowed it. Tiana began typing a text to her mother. Mom, please call me ASAP. Police were called on me in Grant Park. I'm okay, but please come. She pressed send, her heart pounding, not knowing the chain of events that would soon unfurl. In the distance, Kiara was nowhere to be found, and Tiana felt a surge of anxiety. She was alone, surrounded by two officers and a stranger who'd falsely accused her. She clutched her phone, praying her mother would respond quickly. Tiana had no idea just how swiftly her mother would arrive, or how that arrival would send shockwaves through the next hour of their lives. Special Agent Yvonne Jordan was in the middle of a crucial meeting at the Chicago FBI field office when her phone vibrated silently. She recognized her daughter's text alert. Usually, Tiana's messages were light, funny memes or quick updates, but the words on her screen now made Yvonne's stomach clench. Mom, please call me ASAP. Police were called on me in Grant Park. I'm okay, but please come. Yvonne's heart skipped a beat. She stood abruptly, apologizing to her colleagues, a team of analysts and field agents discussing a high-profile operation. I have a family emergency, she said, voice tense. She dashed out of the conference room, ignoring the concerned glances thrown her way. She dialed Tiana immediately. No answer. Panic seeped into Yvonne's veins, but she fought it off. She'd spent her career learning how to remain calm under pressure, investigating interstate crimes, handling kidnappings, even training new recruits. But this was different. This was her daughter. Stay calm, Yvonne, she coached herself, pressing Tiana's number again. Still, no response. She tried to reach Kiara, but realized she didn't have Kiara's direct number. Instead, she called a friend of hers at the Chicago Police Department. If Tiana had an encounter with the police, perhaps someone at the station would know. As special agent in charge for a high-profile division in the FBI, Yvonne had connections. She was not one to flaunt her position, but her daughter's safety came first. Sergeant Allen, a deep voice, answered. "Tom, it's Yvonne Jordan. Do you have any officers responding to an incident in Grant Park involving a young black teenage girl named Tiana Jones?" Her words tumbled out, urgent. There was a pause, then the shuffling of papers. "We got a call from a Margaret Slater about suspicious activity, a possible recording of minors. 2 of our guys from the Honest District responded. Hang on, let me see if I can reach them." Yvonne paced the hallway outside her office, ignoring the stares from passing agents. Her heart pounded in her ears. Soon Sergeant Allen was back on the line. "The officers are on scene," he confirmed. They said, "The girl has ID, no trouble found. She's not being detained. Seems like a misunderstanding." Yvonne exhaled sharply in relief. "I'm heading there right now. Tell them to stay with her until I arrive." She rushed to her office, grabbing her keys and jacket. Normally she'd abide by official channels, but this was her daughter. She left a quick note with her assistant, "Family emergency. Be back soon." Then she practically sprinted to the elevator, all the while sending Tiana another text, "I'm on my way. Stay put, baby. Don't worry." Meanwhile, in Grant Park, Tiana stood awkwardly with the officers. They had relaxed slightly after verifying her identity, but they lingered, as Margaret seemed unwilling to drop her suspicions. Tiana's phone buzzed again. She checked it, feeling a rush of relief at her mother's text. "I'm on my way." The older officer addressed Margaret, trying to diffuse the tension. "Ma'am, we see no evidence of wrongdoing. Are you sure there's anything else we need to address here?" Margaret pursed her lips. "Well, it's still odd," she insisted. "Why would she be alone here near the playground? It's just not right." Tiana tried to keep her voice steady. "I told you, I'm waiting for my friend. We're volunteering at a shelter later. We plan to meet here first because it's close to her violin lesson." Margaret started to retort, but the younger officer shook his head. "Ma'am," he said, "there's nothing illegal about being in a public park. If you're concerned about people filming children, you can report suspicious behavior. But so far, we haven't seen anything that indicates a crime." Despite his calm words, Tiana noticed Margaret seemed deeply entrenched in her assumptions. A pang of hurt twisted in Tiana's chest because she recognized the look on Margaret's face. It was a familiar cocktail of fear, prejudice, and self-justification. Growing up, Tiana had seen that look before in neighbors who accused her of trespassing just for walking down their street, or the store clerk who followed her around the aisle as if she might shoplift. Still, Tiana stood her ground with quiet dignity. Across the park, an unmarked black SUV came into view, screeching to a halt near the sidewalk. Out stepped Yvonne Jordan, tall and poised, wearing a charcoal pantsuit with an FBI badge clipped to her belt. Her eyes swept the scene until she spotted Tiana. The officers noticed her, immediately recognized her face. One of them nudged the other. Margaret followed their gaze, eyebrows knitting in confusion. Yvonne strode across the grass, her posture a masterclass in composure under pressure. Tiana rushed forward. "Mum!" she exclaimed, relief washing over her. Yvonne put a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders, her eyes flicking from the officers to Margaret. "What's going on here?" Yvonne asked, her tone measured but laced with underlying steel. The older officer cleared his throat, dipping his head in a respectful nod. He'd seen Yvonne in departmental briefings before. Everyone knew Agent Jordan's reputation, sharp, fair, unyielding when it came to justice. Margaret's eyes widened as realization slowly dawned on her. This teenager's mother, This black woman who had arrived with such authority wasn't just any mother. She was law enforcement, and from the look on the officers' faces, a high-ranking one at that. We received a call about Tiana being suspicious. The older officer explained carefully, addressing Yvonne. But we found no evidence of wrongdoing. We were just trying to calm the situation. Yvonne's nostrils flared slightly. She kept her voice firm. "I understand you're doing your job," she said, nodding at the officers. "I appreciate that you verified the facts, but I want to know who called this in and why." All eyes turned to Margaret, who suddenly looked like a schoolchild facing the principal. Her posture stiffened, but she tried to maintain composure. "I, saw your daughter near the playground," she stammered. "I thought she might be filming the kids. I was concerned for their safety." A bitter laugh almost escaped Tiana, but she held it in. Yvonne gave Tiana's shoulder a slight squeeze as if to say, "Let me handle this." Then she turned to Margaret. "So your immediate reaction was to call the police on a teenage girl, my daughter, because you assumed she was doing something nefarious." Margaret's mouth opened and closed. I didn't mean. I was just trying to protect." Yvonne's voice was even, but her eyes flashed with an intensity that made Margaret take an involuntary step back. Protect them from what, exactly? A teenager listening to music. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They'd seen similar situations play out before. Usually, they ended with a half-hearted apology or a scramble to justify the call. But rarely had they seen someone of Yvonne's stature appear on the scene to demand accountability. Margaret's voice wavered. "I'm not a bad person. I believe in being vigilant. You can't blame me for being cautious. The news these days, you never know what could happen." Tiana felt a surge of anger. "I'm not a what? I'm a person." But she stayed silent, letting her mother speak. "Miss Slater," Yvonne said, glancing at the woman's name tag pinned to her jacket. "I absolutely believe in vigilance and reporting real threats. That's part of my job. But do you understand how dangerous and humiliating it can be for a young black girl to have the police called on her for doing nothing more than existing in a public space?" Margaret's face turned a shade paler. She inhaled sharply, but still struggled to offer any real apology. She seemed more shocked by Yvonne's presence and authority than concerned about Tiana's ordeal. I didn't know she was your daughter," she said weakly. A scornful, humorless chuckle escaped Tiana now. The implication was clear. If she had known Tiana's mum was an FBI chief, maybe she wouldn't have called the cops. But Tiana found no comfort in that hypothetical. The older officer cleared his throat. "Agent Jordan, as far as we're concerned, there's no criminal activity here. Your daughter is free to go." And Miss Slater called in what she perceived as suspicious behavior. Obviously, we encourage citizens to report if they feel something is off, but we also want to avoid unfounded accusations. Yvonne nodded, acknowledging the officers. She was within her right to file a complaint herself for a false report, but at that moment, her primary focus was on Tiana's well-being. "Are you okay?" she asked her daughter, softening her tone. Tiana nodded, though tears brimmed at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away. "I'm fine, Mum. Just." She exhaled shakily. "I'm okay." Yvonne turned back to Margaret. "I hope you'll think twice before stereotyping a young black girl as a criminal next time." Her voice was cool. "Because this time, you called the police on the daughter of the special agent in charge of the Chicago FBI field office. Next time, it could be someone else, someone without the same protections or resources. And the consequences could be far more devastating." Margaret opened her mouth, searching for words. But none came. She looked around, as if hoping someone would rescue her from this confrontation. No one did. The officers stood by, neutral but no longer sympathetic. Tiana wiped her eyes. the surge of conflicting emotions swirling inside her, relief that her mum had arrived, anger at Margaret's prejudice, and the lingering fear she might have felt if things had escalated differently. Without another word, Yvonne led Tiana away, heading toward the SUV. The officers gave them space. Margaret stayed rooted to the spot, her shoulders rigid. She seemed at a loss, grappling with the magnitude of her mistake, but in truth, she had yet to feel the full brunt of what she had set in motion. Because this was only the beginning, the first domino in a chain reaction that would bring secrets to light, test loyalties, and prove that sometimes karma does not wait quietly in the shadows. Yvonne and Tiana drove in silence for a few minutes, leaving the park behind. The tension in the car was palpable, like a physical weight pressing against both of them. Tiana stared out the window, her mind replaying the encounter. She felt numb, then angry, then relieved, all in waves that made her head spin. She turned off the radio the moment they got in. An upbeat tune felt almost insulting to the emotional gravity swirling in her chest. Finally, Yvonne glanced at her daughter. "Talk to me, T," she said gently, using the nickname she'd given Tiana when she was a toddler. "What are you feeling?" Tiana swallowed, her voice coming out strained. "I'm mad. But more than that, I'm tired. Why does this keep happening?" She fiddled with the hem of her shirt. "I wasn't even doing anything wrong, Mom. I was just existing." Yvonne nodded, her own eyes heavy with empathy. I know, baby, and I'm sorry you shouldn't have to deal with that, ever." The car stopped at a red light. Yvonne reached over and placed a comforting hand on Tiana's shoulder. "I'm proud of you for staying calm. I know it's not easy." They continued driving toward the FBI building, so Yvonne could sort out her abrupt exit from the meeting. Her assistant had texted multiple times, but Yvonne needed a moment with Tiana first. She parked in a reserved spot. "Come inside," she said, "just for a bit. I'll sort out some work issues and then we'll head home." Tiana nodded, unbuckling her seatbelt. She'd been to her mum's workplace before: large halls, security checkpoints, an array of stoic men and women in suits. It always felt a bit intimidating, but also strangely comforting. Her mum was respected here. People knew Yvonne's competence and leadership. There was power in that, a power Tiana wished every black woman could wield against injustice. As they stepped into the high-rise, Tiana walked a bit behind her mother, trying to regain her composure. Faces turned, and a few people asked if everything was all right. Yvonne offered brief explanations about a family matter, and then she guided Tiana toward her private office. Inside, Tiana settled on a small couch while Yvonne made a quick phone call to finalize the meeting's next steps. A few minutes later, Yvonne turned from her desk to face her daughter. "Feel like telling me exactly what happened?" she asked softly. Tiana recounted the morning arriving at the park, waiting for Kiara, being approached by the officers, how Margaret insisted she was some kind of predator. Yvonne's expression grew stern when Tiana described the words loitering and filming children. When Tiana finished, Yvonne nodded grimly. "I'll say it again, I'm really proud of you for staying calm, but we're not letting this go." Tiana blinked. "What do you mean?" Yvonne sighed, leaning forward. "Margaret Slater called the police under false pretenses, and her actions put you in danger. Racial profiling can't just be brushed aside. I'm thinking about next steps. Maybe we talk to the precinct or the city council about better training for 911 dispatchers on bias. We can also consider if a formal complaint against Miss Slater is warranted." Tiana chewed her lip. A part of her just wanted to forget the incident. Another part recognized the importance of accountability. "What if it just ends up making more trouble for us?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Yvonne's gaze softened. "I understand. We'd have to think this through carefully. But our silence doesn't always protect us, and if we say nothing, people like Miss Slater learn nothing. They'll do it again and again, to someone else's daughter, someone else's sister, friend." Tiana nodded slowly. She could see her mother's point. Okay, I trust you. Just then, Yvonne's phone buzzed, displaying a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Agent Jordan speaking. A hesitant female voice echoed on the other end. Hi, Agent Jordan. This is Kiara's mum, Linda. I got your number from Kiara's phone. She said Tiana's with you. Relief crossed Tiana's face. She leaned forward to hear. Yvonne put the call on speaker. Linda explained that Kiara had been frantically texting Tiana, worried when she didn't reply. She'd finished her violin lesson late, arrived at the park, and found Tiana gone with police nearby. Terrified, Kiara had called her mum. Yvonne reassured Linda that Tiana was safe. They made plans to regroup that evening at Linda's home, where Tiana and Kiara could talk and debrief about the volunteer event. Linda apologized profusely for the confusion. I'm just glad everyone's safe, she said. But I'm sorry Tiana had to go through that. After ending the call, Tiana felt her spirits lift slightly, knowing Kiara was looking out for her. Yvonne gave Tiana's hand a gentle squeeze. We'll get through this. But while mother and daughter were solidifying their bond, Margaret Slater found herself in the midst of a quiet storm brewing in her own life. Unbeknownst to Tiana and Yvonne, Margaret's background had secrets that were beginning to resurface, secrets that had more to do with the FBI than either of them could imagine. After leaving Grant Park, Margaret Slater drove home in a cloud of shame and growing anxiety. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, wincing at the memory of Special Agent Yvonne Jordan's icy stare and the teenage girl's hurt expression. Margaret wanted to rationalize her actions, but with each passing minute, it became harder. Had she truly believed Tiana was a threat, or was she driven by fear and prejudice she refused to acknowledge? Margaret lived in a gentrified neighborhood near the West Loop, in a sleek condo building with a doorman. As she entered the marble-floored lobby, she forced a polite smile at the attendant. "Any mail for me, Louise?" she asked, her voice a bit shaky. Louise handed her a small stack of envelopes. Margaret took the elevator up to her 12th floor unit, her mind swirling. She was not prepared for what she'd find among the mail. Amidst the usual bills and advertisements was a plain envelope with no return address. She opened it cautiously, expecting junk. Instead, her eyes widened at a single sheet of paper inside, a photocopied FBI form from years ago, one referencing a complaint of corporate fraud filed against her and her then-husband, Robert Slater. Heart-pounding, Margaret dropped onto her living room sofa, the paper fluttering in her trembling hands. She read the lines again, an old case she thought had been buried, one the FBI had closed years ago due to lack of evidence. But why was this suddenly resurfacing? Who sent it to her? Her phone buzzed, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. An unknown number flashed on the screen. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A distorted voice whispered. "Did you really think your past would stay hidden, Margaret? Some secrets come back, and you've just made yourself a target again." The line clicked dead. Her blood ran cold. Margaret's mind raced. Who would do this? Robert? No, he's gone. Maybe one of his former associates? She remembered the accusations swirling around Robert's investment schemes back then, how they both narrowly avoided charges due to a lack of concrete proof. Margaret had since worked hard to rebuild her life, maintain respectability, even if she lived under a constant undercurrent of fear. Now the callousness of the morning's events weighed heavier on her. She's FBI. That girl's mother is FBI, Margaret thought, horror creeping in. Could she be looking into me now? Margaret forced herself to calm down, but the shame and fear gnawed at her. Her conscience pricked. Had she unwittingly turned the spotlight back on herself by calling the police on Tiana? She sank deeper into the couch, the hush of her upscale condo mocking her, the silence pressed in, amplifying the thunder in her heart. A wave of regret washed over her as she realized that her snap judgment in the park had potentially opened a door she desperately wanted to keep locked. And little did she know, forces beyond her control were already at play. The final reckoning was coming, and it carried the distinct seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Meanwhile, back at the FBI field office, Yvonne couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something about Margaret Slater's name rang a faint bell in her memory. The day's events had ended, at least superficially, but Yvonne's instincts told her there was more beneath the surface. She pulled up the FBI's internal database on her office computer. Typing in Margaret Slater brought up a few hits: address confirmations, routine background checks. Then she saw it a closed file from 9 years earlier regarding potential involvement in corporate fraud. No charges were filed. Yvonne leaned in, reading the details. The case had been flagged, then dropped due to insufficient evidence and the main suspect's disappearance, Robert Slater, Margaret's ex-husband. The text implied that Margaret might have been aware of her husband's illegal dealings, but no direct link was ever established. Yvonne frowned. She wasn't the type to hold personal grudges or leverage her position in petty ways. But she also knew that sometimes an unexpected event shed light on a deeper issue. Could it be that Margaret was receiving blackmail threats, or was connected to a ring of white-collar criminals still under investigation? Yvonne wasn't sure. However, it was her duty to follow leads, especially if new developments hinted at ongoing criminal activity. She decided to send a discreet email to a colleague in the white-collar crimes division. Hey, can you pull any additional intel on Margaret Slater and Robert Slater from the old corporate fraud case #ZX4731? Let me know if there's anything currently active or suspicious. She hit send, leaning back in her chair, pondering the day's chaos. On one hand, she had to protect her daughter's interests, possibly pursue legal action against Margaret for the false report. On the other, she sensed a potential unraveling of something bigger. While waiting, she also typed up a brief memo about the incident in Grant Park, making sure to keep it official and fact-based. She included a note on how the local police responded and Tiana's perspective. If it escalated or garnered media attention, Yvonne wanted the record to be clear and transparent. Minutes later, her phone rang. It was Agent Carla Delgado from White Collar Crimes. "Hey, Yvonne," Carla began, her tone curious. "I just saw your message. Funny you should ask about Margaret Slater. I got a tip this morning from an anonymous source referencing that old Slater case. Something about new evidence. I haven't had time to dig in yet." Yvonne felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of evidence?" "Not sure," Carla replied. "Just a cryptic tip that we should reopen the file. I was about to put in a request for more resources, but we're swamped. If you've got capacity on your end, maybe we can collaborate." "You have a personal interest in this?" Yvonne hesitated, deciding how much to reveal. She opted for partial honesty. "Margaret Slater had a run-in with my daughter today. It's complicated. I'm not sure if this tip is connected or just a coincidence, but we should follow up." "Agreed," Carla said. "Let's set up a joint briefing tomorrow." "Sounds good," Yvonne confirmed. "Keep me posted if anything else comes in tonight." They hung up. Yvonne stared at the phone, a swirl of emotions rippling through her. Margaret Slater had no idea that her call to the police might soon uncover a far more damning truth, one that would send shockwaves through her carefully curated life. And Yvonne, though she did not relish the role, was uniquely positioned to bring that truth to light. The following day dawned grey and drizzly, a stark contrast to the bright sun of the previous morning. Tiana stayed home from school, partly to process the emotional fallout of the park incident, and partly because Yvonne wanted her close in case any more drama arose. Tiana spent most of her morning texting Kiara, who was outraged on her friend's behalf. "We have to share your story on social media," Kiara suggested. "People need to know what happened." Tiana wavered. "I'm not trying to go viral," she typed back. "I just want people to treat me like a human being." While Tiana grappled with that, Yvonne headed to the office for the joint briefing with Agent Carla Delgado. They met in a small conference room. Carla placed a manila folder on the table. "Anonymous tipster sent these last night. Copies of old financial documents. Looks like they link Margaret Slater to offshore accounts that were previously thought to be solely under Robert Slater's control." Yvonne leafed through the documents, eyebrows arching. "If these are authentic, it suggests Margaret may have been more involved than we realized. She could be facing charges if we prove she knowingly facilitated fraud or laundered money." Carla nodded. "We'll need a forensic accountant to confirm, but this is big. Could blow the old case wide open." They talked strategy, deciding to proceed cautiously. Margaret Slater was not the prime target, but if Robert Slater was still out there running shady operations, she could be key to locating him or unraveling the scheme. Yvonne felt a surge of professional determination. If Margaret had committed crimes or harbored criminals, it was Yvonne's duty to seek justice. Yet she couldn't ignore the personal dimension. Margaret was the woman who had humiliated Tiana. The coincidence was almost too large to be a coincidence. Meanwhile, across the city, Margaret's world was crumbling. She had received 2 more unmarked envelopes. Each contained snippets of documents tying her to Robert's illicit dealings. "The phone calls, always from unknown numbers," continued. "A single threat repeated in different forms. The FBI will know everything soon." She was certain Yvonne was behind this, retaliating for what happened in the park. Desperate, she called a lawyer friend to ask for advice. Her friend, Janice, listened patiently to Margaret's frantic explanation. "Look, if these documents are real and they prove your involvement, you could be in serious trouble," Janice said gravely. "You need to contact the authorities. Come clean if you know something." "I can't do that," Margaret hissed. "They'll arrest me, ruin my reputation." Janice exhaled. "They might. Or you might work out a deal if you help them get the bigger fish, Robert, or whoever else was in on this. You have to decide quickly, Margaret. Once the feds come knocking, it's too late for negotiations." Margaret ended the call, tears brimming in her eyes. She felt a surge of misplaced anger toward Tiana and Yvonne. If they hadn't shown up, none of this would be happening. She refused to see that her choices, both past and present, had led her to this precipice. Instead, she blamed them for lighting the match that threatened to burn her life's facade to ashes. That evening, as Tiana sat with her mother at the dinner table picking at her food, absent-mindedly telling Yvonne about Kiara's plan to talk about the incident online, Yvonne's phone buzzed with an alert from Carla. "Heads up. We might have enough to bring Margaret Slater in for questioning soon." Yvonne placed her phone aside, her expression unreadable. Tiana noticed. "Mom, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Just work stuff," Yvonne said, giving a soft smile. She didn't want to burden Tiana further. Not yet, because if Carla's suspicion was right, by the end of the week, Margaret Slater would be facing a reckoning of her own, a direct consequence of both her past deeds and her present-day prejudices. Karma, it seemed, was about to be served in full measure. 2 days later, Margaret's doorbell rang at dawn. She woke with a start, adrenaline jolting her heart. Through the peephole, she saw 2 individuals in dark suits, flashing badges to the doorman. She swallowed hard, her worst fear materializing. The FBI had come. Her stomach churned as she unlocked the door. Standing there were Agents Carla Delgado and Mark Evers. "Margaret Slater," Carla said, her tone neutral. "We have a few questions regarding an ongoing investigation." Behind them, building security stood watch, as if anticipating trouble. Margaret trembled, but tried to maintain an air of confidence. "This must be a misunderstanding," she began, stepping aside to let them in. The condo, usually impeccably neat, had boxes scattered around. Margaret had been frantically packing some belongings, thinking she might flee if the blackmail escalated. Carla's gaze flicked over the boxes, but said nothing. They sat in the living room. "We have documents suggesting your involvement in financial transactions tied to Robert Slater's fraudulent investment schemes," Carla said, opening a folder. "We'd like to know if you were aware of these transactions and whether you have information on Robert's current whereabouts." Margaret felt cornered. She folded her arms, voice shaky. I don't know where Robert is. We divorced long ago. He left me with nothing. I had no idea he was involved in anything illegal." Carla slid the documents across the coffee table. "These records show a joint account with your name, opened in the Cayman Islands. Deposits that match suspicious funds from Robert's corporations." She glanced up, her eyes penetrating. "Are you saying you never signed anything or authorized any transfers?" Margaret stared at the pages. They bore her signature, clearly hers. She remembered. Robert had insisted it was just a routine way to protect their savings. She'd been eager to maintain their lavish lifestyle, so she never questioned him too closely. Shame and fear warred inside her. She realized the harsh reality. Lying would only dig her deeper. Carla continued, "If you cooperate, we can consider recommending leniency. If not, we'll have no choice but to pursue charges to the fullest extent." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to blame Robert, the blackmailer, the system, anyone but herself. But all she could do was choke out, I might have signed something for Robert years ago. I didn't ask questions. I just wanted a certain life." That admission hung in the air. Carla nodded, her demeanor firm yet professional. She explained how Margaret needed to come to the FBI field office for a formal statement. Margaret felt as if the room were closing in on her. She saw her reflection in the glass coffee table, haggard, eyes rimmed red, a far cry from the composed woman who'd roamed Grant Park just days before, assured of her righteousness. Carla and Mark escorted Margaret out, waiting politely as she grabbed her coat. They assured her it wasn't an arrest at this stage, but that could change depending on her cooperation. Margaret managed a nod, her thoughts in turmoil. She remembered Tiana's frightened eyes at the park, how she'd hardened her heart, insisted she was just being cautious. Now she stood on the brink of criminal charges, ironically about to be interrogated in the very building where Tiana's mother wielded significant authority. Later that morning, the formal questioning began. Margaret sat at a table opposite Carla with a tape recorder on. She handed over the blackmail letters, recounted the suspicious phone calls, and revealed all she knew about Robert's shady dealings. Each confession felt like a blow to her pride. When Carla asked if Margaret had any interactions with an FBI agent recently, Margaret's face flushed. "Yes," she whispered. I encountered Special Agent Yvonne Jordan in Grant Park. I didn't realize who she was when I called the police on her daughter." Carla exchanged a glance with her partner. "That's quite the coincidence," Carla said. "But you understand that personal matter doesn't affect our current proceedings, correct? This is about your alleged involvement in fraud. Agent Jordan is not leading this case, though she did request a look into your old file." Carla paused, her tone turning more sympathetic. "I'm just curious, did you think Agent Jordan was blackmailing you?" Margaret fidgeted. "I did, at first, but I realize that might be irrational. I don't even know who's sending these threats." Carla nodded. "If there's an ongoing threat to you, we'll investigate. But right now, our main priority is understanding your role in these transactions and whether Robert Slater is still operating illegally." Margaret swallowed. She knew cooperating was her only chance at leniency, and so, for hours, she spilled details she once vowed to keep secret. By the end of the day, she was exhausted, emotionally spent. She left with a swirl of conflicting emotions, dread of possible charges, relief at finally telling the truth, and a deep, gnawing regret about Tiana. Because even if she evaded prison, she would never escape the guilt of what she'd done, both as a complicit partner in fraud and as a woman who had profiled a black teenager out of her own unconscious biases. In the days that followed, the story of Margaret's interrogation at the FBI slowly leaked out. No mainstream media had picked up Tiana's park incident, but word spread among neighbors and acquaintances that Margaret Slater was in serious legal trouble. The local rumor mill churned, and some of those who once praised Margaret's vigilance now distanced themselves, citing, "I always knew there was something off about her." She found herself socially isolated, haunted by her own reflection every morning, wondering if she'd become the very threat she once feared in others. As for Tiana, she struggled with whether to share her story publicly. Chiara argued it was important to highlight these injustices. Tiana posted a brief account on her social media, omitting names, but describing how she was profiled by someone in a public park. Support poured in, friends, classmates, even strangers offering solidarity. Yvonne watched quietly, proud of her daughter's resilience. Tiana's post ended with a simple statement: "I was not doing anything wrong. I shouldn't have to prove that. I shouldn't be a suspect just for existing." And in the background, Yvonne continued her work, discreetly aware of Margaret's cooperation in the reopened fraud case. She harbored no personal vendetta. Her pursuit of justice was rooted in principle, not revenge. But a part of her felt a sense of poetic resolution. Margaret, who had so readily judged Tiana as a criminal, was now facing a real criminal investigation of her own. In the final twist of irony, as the FBI's case against Robert Slater gained momentum, Margaret realized she might one day owe her freedom to the woman she had tried to humiliate. If Yvonne Jordan chose to show compassion, or if her testimony helped Margaret secure a plea deal, the woman who'd been so quick to call the police on Tiana might be saved by Tiana's mother's sense of fairness. It was a stark reminder that in a world fraught with prejudice, assumptions, and hidden sins, mercy and justice can sometimes intertwine. And that, ultimately, karma has a way of finding its mark, whether through a single fateful phone call in a city park or the unstoppable wheels of a federal investigation, fueled by truth and the pursuit of what is right. In the end, the story of Margaret Slater and Tiana Jones stands as a powerful testament to the unpredictable web of choices and consequences. A quick phone call rooted in fear and bias set off a chain reaction that revealed far more than Margaret ever intended. Tiana's trauma sparked a deeper conversation about racial profiling, and Yvonne Jordan's intervention showcased that justice wears many faces. Margaret, once so sure of her own righteousness, was forced to confront the echoes of her past, the stark truth about her complicity, and the undeniable fact that no life is above scrutiny. So what can we take away from all this? That our snap judgments carry weight, that every action can unearth secrets we'd rather keep hidden, and that, sometimes, karma arrives in ways we least expect, but precisely when we need a lesson the most. If you found meaning in this story and believe it carries a message worth sharing, please hit that like button, share it with friends or on social media, and consider subscribing to this channel for more content that dives into real-life lessons and eye-opening dramas. Your support helps us reach more people, start essential conversations, and keep shining a light on the stories that need to be told. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.